Hello, this is Jazz from Spa Speakers. This is the second part of the committee tutorial video aimed at the treasurer. In the first video, I walked through the file structure of our Dropbox and kind of gave you a bit of a sense of how to store and manage those files to ensure that when it comes to actually preparing the month-end accounts, everything is set up in a orderly fashion, and the importance of maintaining good quality records, both because we should be reporting back on a biannual basis to our members as to how we are spending their membership dues, and that we're going to be doing at the end of the year, for each Toastmaster committee year, an audit which will be led by a member of the club who hasn't been on the committee to ensure that everything is above board, for want of a better turn of phrase. So in this video, I'm just going to walk you through, blow by blow, how to prepare the month-end accounts. Okay, so let's go. The first thing is I would go to the treasurer's email inbox. So I'll quickly load that up. I use a email client called EasyMail, but you can log in via Gmail or whatever client you happen to have. So let's go to the treasurer email address. And here you will have, you'll be able to get receipts and all sorts from this. So if I go to the expenses and receipts folder, this is where we store all the stuff. I'll just give you an illustration. I got a receipt, an invoice for booking out this room at Warwick. So this file has already been saved in our invoices paid down here, Warwick. All right. And so all of the invoices that have been paid should be stored in here. And that will be important for when we take the next stage where we do a reconciliation to make sure that everything that is in our transaction statement is reflected by an invoice or an expense receipt. If you are doing this before the end of the month and you aren't going to immediately pay, you should store it in this folder. Store it in this folder. Then when you log in to make payments, you make the payment and then move that invoice into invoice paid. Okay, hope that makes sense. With expenses, you as a treasurer will email out to all the committee members saying, if you've incurred any expenses during the course of the month, please email me the receipt, the reason, the date, all the particulars that are on the expense reimbursement manager, because you as treasurer will be responsible for populating the spreadsheet. Once you've received confirmations and receipts for all of the expenses incurred by committee officers, you will then email the president and say, here are the expenses that have been incurred during the course of the month. Can you authorize them, please? And at that stage, for the most part, the president will say, yep, I fully expected those expenses, go ahead. And if there are any questions, then you as treasurer will then go back to whoever it is who has had a question mark raised over an expense and just work out what the situation is. Okay. And then you would obviously complete this, create a file name, as was mentioned in the previous video, and you would save the expense receipts that you've received in this folder with that file name that was generated in the expense management tool. Okay, so you've done all of that now. Now we're going to get into the heavy duty bit. What I'm going to show you now is how to download the CSV, the complete transactions from the account. I'm going to open up my browser. And open up the Lloyds bank account. So you should hopefully have access to this very soon after you join, or if not, immediately after joining. We'll log in. And you will have a card reader and a debit card, which will give you the relevant tools to access the account. So I'm just going to enter the passcode, which has been generated on my card reader for security purposes. And I'll load. So now I'm into the Lloyds bank account. So since we do this on a monthly basis, we want to specify just 1 month of data, because sometimes the transaction report here, it will actually span, oh, it's not on this page here, but if I go to the statement, it will span over multiple months, and you only want to have 1 month's worth of data. So you'll see here that you've got like a searchable statement and you've got these various fields. So April is the month that I know has a complete set of records, because at the time of producing this video, it's just 2 or 3 days into May, and you want to download this after the end of the month to get a complete record of the month, right? So each month is from the first of that month to the very end of that month. Each downloadable report should be just 1 month's worth of data. So I'm going to click April. And what will happen is that it will now find only April data. And now it's going to give me statement options. So just to quickly show you, there's a bunch of information there. I don't want to show you too much of that stuff, but I'm going to now export those transactions. So it says all shown on screen. So since I selected April, I'm only going to get April data there. So if I select all shown on screen here, it will give me just a month's worth of data. It will give me just April. Please select export type. You want to export it as a CSV, which is an Excel readable file format. And then you'd click export. And then you'd click save file. So you'll see this file name here. It's a very convoluted file name. Hit OK. And then I will go then to the Dropbox folder, Toastmasters, Treasurer folder, Sparse Speakers, and into the Lloyds download data. And you can see there is a file structure which is a bit clearer than this kind of random, seemingly random series of numbers. What I typically do is I will replicate this file name structure by just clicking left clicking once, so it almost repeats the file name, but I won't hit save at this juncture. I will just go ahead and change the numerals to reflect the current month. As you can see, I've already downloaded the data for Lloyds for April, so I'm not going to hit save, but needless to say, let's say for example I was downloading May's data, I would change that 4 to a 5, so it will create a separate file. And it's clear that it will be data for 2018 May 2018-05. Hit save, and I'll preserve this lovely kind of file naming convention without having to kind of manually type too much stuff. So imagine at this juncture I hit save and the file is saved here. Actually no, I will actually save it. I will save it. Do you want to replace the existing data? I'm going to say yes. I'm going to replace that data. And that's all you need from the bank account. You just need to download that CSV file. So this is why it's really important that you pay all your invoices and reimburse all the expenses before the end of the month. So that means that when you download this bank statement, it will reflect all of those transactions. Otherwise, if you do it late, then I'll actually end up feeding into the next month, and so the accounts will be out of sync and out of step, which is never a good thing. Okay, so what next? I'm going to go now to the Lloyds data downloads. I'm going to go to that file that I've just downloaded, and you can see here. Here we go. And you'll see, I'm just going to shrink that and shrink that. You don't want to see too much of that detail. And you'll see we've got a transaction report of all the stuff that's happened, which is kind of cool. Great. Sorry, you know, if I was doing this in real life, I'd make these bigger so it's easier to read. But for security purposes, I'm kind of just shrinking it down, so not revealing too much information about what's going on here. Now, here's the funny thing here: the transactions, they are sort ordered, so they start. The earliest dates start at the bottom, and the most recent transactions occur at the top. Now we want to sort order this so the most recent transactions are at the bottom and the oldest transactions are at the top. And the way that we're going to do this is, it's a bit of a hack, but it works. So I'm going to create a new column called sort, and I'm going to call the last entry on this list, which is the first entry in a chronological sense, I'm going to call that 1. I'm going to call this 2, and then I'm going to just select these 2 cells and then copy and paste up, and you'll see it will create a list of numbers, which is you know, a series of integers, which is starts 1 for the most recent, for the oldest transaction, and the oldest transaction is the biggest number. Then what I'm going to do is go to data and go to sort. And what I'm going to do is select sort as my field. I want to sort on values, and I want the order as is listed here, smallest to largest. And you can see now it's been sorted, so the 1 is at the top and the 20 is at the bottom. And therefore the oldest transaction is at the top and the most recent transaction is at the bottom. And this is essential because of how we're going to use the data. Okay, great. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to open up our club accounts. And I'm going to go to the tutorial. This won't be here when you enter this folder. This particular file tutorial has been produced especially for you, to help you understand the process. Rightio. And you'll see here there is all the historical transactions here for the club, which isn't that great. So what I'm going to do now is go back to that spreadsheet, the data spreadsheet. I'm not going to include the header files, the titles of the columns. I'm just going to take the data. I'm going to copy that, and there's a couple of ways of doing that. You can right click and hit copy, and I'm going to now go to the Spa Speakers accounts and I'm going to paste them. I'm going to paste them as values, 1, 2, 3, so that you want them to be as values, not as links or anything else, just values. Rightio. So what has that achieved? This data, which is the Lloyd's data spreadsheet, that's where you copy and paste this data, is just the raw data. But it gets fed into another sheet which is called bank log, which you see here. Oop. Let me, so there is a close, let me just close this down. These wouldn't actually be here when you copy and paste this data. So you'll see that these are calculated fields, kind of. This is essentially a kind of portion of the text which is the transaction description, which comes straight from the CSV file. This space here is essentially a description that we want to write to help us understand what the transaction actually means. This again comes from the Lloyd's data, so it's a formula. So does this, so does this. This here, well, I shouldn't have deleted it really, but there is a drop-down menu which basically allows you to select what category of transaction is this. And it's really important that you use this drop-down menu rather than just make up terms, because the financial analysis that happens afterwards depends on these categories being set correctly. And then you've got the transaction values as well. So one thing you might notice that there's this green column here and it's got a bunch of zeros. If this figure is not 0 on any of these fields, something has gone wrong. The numbers are not reconciling. Okay? Something has gone wrong. So in which case you need to do some sort of digging to figure out what went wrong. Now I can't anticipate in this video what has gone wrong. Needless to say, if you do experience a problem, refer back to the previous treasurer and they can help you to problem solve, and hopefully you'll acquire some knowledge as to what might have gone wrong so you can pass that knowledge on to your successor as well. So as I said before, as you can see, there are descriptions in place here for the various transactions. So you can see, oh, there's a debit card transaction fee, which is a bank charge. Somebody renewed their fees. There was some rent. There was social expenditure here. There's a reimbursement for some fees. And some categories have been set too. So this debit card transaction has been categorized as a bank charge, and this renewal has been categorized as fees in. And you can see here, this is a C. That means it's a credit, so you know that this is money coming in as opposed to money going out. This is the D, which means it's money going out. This is D, D, D. So these mainly there are spend, and only in this instance is it a credit. And you can see certain categories have been set. So how these categories are used, I don't want to go into too much detail. Needless to say, work with the previous treasurer to help you to determine what the categories are. For the most part, they're going to be relatively intuitive, but sometimes there is some ambiguity as to what should be the category. Okay. Now, as you can see, let's say in this case, we've got this transaction, so it's Bagger KS plus SK cash. And that doesn't really tell you all that much as to what that transaction is. This is where you need to go back into the records that have been kept to help you understand what that transaction actually means. So I'll quickly illustrate that process for your benefit. If I go to invoices paid, and I go to TMI club statements, you'll see there is a host of club statements that have been produced. And you should be able to sort of see, I'm not going to open them up because I've got personal data in there, transactions that have happened, and you'll be able to match out what those transactions mean by doing a comparison. Alternatively, and quite often, you'll know what it is. So in this case, it's £57, which is our regular renewal, and it's a credit. So we're pretty sure that this is actually a renewal for a particular member. And the transaction kind of data here, which I've highlighted just over here, suggests it's Bagger. So we know that there's a member with that surname. So the information clearly signposts what this is. So I would say this is renewal. There we go. And actually what we should say is, because there could be more than one cash in the future, and we'll say this is ease in, because that's what it is. And we would do this for every single one of these transactions. We would go in and we would determine what these transactions are. So here, to Matt Dutton, and it's a debit. That means it is an expense reimbursement. So what we can do in this instance, for the 3rd of April, we can go into the expense reimbursement manager. Let's open that up. And you'll see, go down to April. Oh, the nearest transaction is this one here, £16. And you can see that actually, the reimbursement was scheduled for the 1st of April. And it was processed by the bank on the 3rd of April. So very strong probability, because the amount is the same, the person is the same, that this is the transaction. So we also want to make sure that we've got a receipt for that transaction. Oh, but we've already checked it because we can actually see that there's a flag. So if you've gone through this process diligently previously, you can just use these flags to determine, yeah, this transaction is absolutely fine and I don't need to question it. So then I would say this is badges, expense. Oh, there we go, expenses for badges. That's good enough. And then we would put that under supplies. Okay, and you would just go through that process until every single transaction has got a description and a category associated with it. So as it turns out, these have already been done. So I'm just going to copy and paste them back in. Here you go. Just to complete that record. So this temp folder would not normally be there. It's just for the it's just for the purposes of illustrating what happens, how you go about this process. So now we've got a complete record of our accounts, which is great. The next thing to do is to use that data and add them into our final accounts. And you can see here we have a record: July, August, September, October, November, December. Fees in, any fee refunds, the net of those, so fees minus refunds. Oh, sorry, that's something that's fees minus refunds. Yeah, you get it. Just, you know, any other income that's come in. These are our total essential spends, or, you know, mandatory spends. So those are TMI dues, bank charges, rent, web costs. And then these are the categories, and this is why it's important to use the categories that are set here, because they feed into here. If you use different categories, then you won't have a place to put these transactions and it will mess up our reporting, which is never a good thing. And then we've got a section for pass-through credit and debit, and I just want to explain this kind of pass-through idea. In certain instances, the bank account has been used to collect money for, let's say, for example, a social, and then pay for that social in one fell swoop. So let's say, for example, we got a club meal, the Christmas meal. We would ask members, pay a deposit, pay it to our Spa Speakers bank account. And then what we will do when we have to actually pay for that Christmas meal is actually pay it in all one fell swoop as a single debit card transaction. Since the club isn't going to play anything out of our own club accounts, we call this a pass-through expense and a pass-through credit. So the pass-through credit is when we get our deposits in for the Christmas meal, and the pass-through debit is when we pay that out to the person. And at the end of the year, the net pass-through should be 0. If it's negative, it means that we have spent out of our club funds, and we haven't properly managed the process of using the bank account to just act as a kind of intermediary store of funds, which is really bad, and we need to sort that out as soon as possible. Or it will be positive, as it is here, which means that actually we got more deposits in than we actually ended up paying out, and so we made a kind of a profit for the club. Now what I'm going to recommend for the treasurer of next year is do not use the club bank account in this way, because it makes things much, much more complicated, and it creates confusion and it creates work for the treasurer. So don't do it. As it turns out, in this particular year, it worked in our favour, but it's just not worth the effort. So I'm going to recommend that you don't. And you'll see here, and this won't be in the accounts that you'll be responsible for because we've eliminated petty cash. But here are adjustments made in view of the fact that there are petty cash expenditures that were made for these categories. So these need to then be added back to create an overall picture of our discretionary spend. So that will be this data, which comes from the bank data. This, which comes from the expense reimbursement manager, but only the petty cash entries, because the ones that are flagged as bank account are already here. So to include the bank account and the petty cash from the reimbursed manager would be to double count those. So definitely don't want to do that. And you would just enter those details in. So we're going to do April, because that's the new data that we've added in. How do you go about doing that in an easy and smooth fashion? Filters are your friends. Let me say that. Filters are your friend. You're going to use filters a lot in order to complete these accounts. So let me do that. Go to bank log, and you'll see that this section here, these little arrows here, and you can see that filter has been selected. So let's take that off. If a filter isn't on, this top row will look as follows. But if I select it all and click filter, then these kind of drop downs will come through. So what you want to do, if you want to focus specifically on April data, and it's April 2018 in this particular instance, firstly I don't need 2017, then I'll open up 2018 and I'll unselect everything but April, and lo and behold, the only data that I see now is April. Brilliant. Now the next thing I want to do is sum up all of the categories one by one to manually enter them here. So oops, not this one. Go to categories, unselect everything, and then choose one that you want to enter. So I'm going to choose fees in because that's the very top entry. Fees in. And you can see these are all credits, so that's great. I just need to select this data here, and you can see here that the sum total of those numbers is now revealed here, £325. So what I'm going to do is enter £325 here. Were there any fee refunds? Well, there weren't, because if there were, there would be a C and a D here, but there's only a C here, which means there's only been credits, there's only been fees coming in, there have been no refunds in this case. So what I'm going to do next, I'm now going to look at the next mandatory cost, which is pay TMI, which are the TMI dues. And you can see here, these are Ds, these are debits, and there's 4 of them. And the total sum of those debits is £188.90. So I'm going to go ahead and add that in here. Pay TMI, April, £188.90. Go back to the bank log. And now the next cost that's going to be added is rent. Go to rent and there's £45. Go to rent, £45. Next one is, well, next one was bank charges. So, well, see, I made an error there. So I'll stick that in there, it's £45. Put it in the row underneath. Go back to bank charges. And we had £5.18 of bank charges. So I'll add that. Get the picture, right? So let's just go through the whole process. Supplies. Go to bank charges. Oops, not that one. Go to categories. Go to supplies. And these are all debits. So that's good. So I can just confidently just sum all this data. £21.11. Okay. Was there any catering? Let's have a look. It doesn't appear on the list, so there was no catering. So let's find what's next. There's asset purchases, travels. Actually, this just if it's here, then it needs to be included. So we've already done bank charges, we've done fees in. We haven't done pass-through, so that's the next one on the list. Let's do that. Pass-through. Pass-through is £100. And it's a, oops, let's check. Is it a credit or a debit? It's a credit. So if I go to pass-through credit, pop that here, £100. Excellent. And what we're going to do here is, we've done pay TMI, we've done rent, we did supplies, I believe. We've got to do travel. Travel is £69.60. £69.60. Right. And I believe that has done the job. We are now current. So now we can see this is our totals. Our total fees in so far is the sum total of all that so far, and so on and so forth. And obviously we have this petty cash adjustment, which we've cancelled now, so you won't have to deal with this in your term as long as you don't go down the treasurer route. And I'd recommend that you don't do pass-through. That will further simplify your job as treasurer. And so you've got some complete accounts, and one way you can audit whether your accounts are complete is that the final cash position here, because I've got a pass-through, this is my final position, it says £14. That means that there is a £14 net cash flow positive for the entire year, which is pretty good. It means that we're in credit. So I can validate that because I can see what my balance was at the beginning of the year and what the balance is now. So if I subtract this, oops, the current balance from the old balance, you'll see it's £14. And since this data is not related to this data at all, this is actually a validation. It proves that these accounts are fully reconciled, which is brilliant. So what do you do after that? So you've done all this kind of fancy hard work of reconciling the accounts and writing this report. So now you need to get this into a format that can be reported to the committee. So if you go to DCP template, this is the template that you would use. So you've got our discretionary budget, how much we've actually spent. So you would input these figures into a report that the secretary will be responsible for maintaining. And in that report, there will be actually the budget figures. So these actual figures can be compared against the budget figures. And you can see whether you're overspending or underspending, or whether they're spend that unexpected or you don't understand. And then the committee can then understand what's going on. So that will all need to go into that report. There's this figure, which is the total, which is the sum total of all of this discretionary spend that we've had so far. These figures also will go into the report. The current bank balance is fed from here. So as long as you go through the process I've just described, this current bank balance will be correct. It will actually be, it will be absolutely, even though you haven't necessarily directly quoted it from the bank, this would be right. It won't be right if any of these fields are red. If any of those fields are red, something's gone wrong. And you need to go in and do some error checking. Current receivables. So I haven't talked about receivables and liabilities yet. So a very quick overview of those ideas. A receivable is money that we are expecting to receive from some source, but have not yet received it. So it's almost like giving you a signal or giving you a reminder. Person X or supplier X owes us money. And so we log our liabilities and receivables in this spreadsheet here. And we also have, okay, let's just go there now. So in the receivables, you can see that, we had, so this spreadsheet is not the nicest looking, but here's the basic beats. In the current year, we as a club paid for room rent for the club officer training on behalf of the area. So that's money that we spent, but we weren't meant to spend, right? We were expecting a reimbursement. So that represents a receivable for us in the club. So I entered it here as a receivable. We also did catering for that event, which came up to a sum total of £46. So that's a receivable for us. So the total receivable here, as of the 3rd of February, was £169. And then the area director reimbursed us that money. And so now I've subtracted that out, and therefore if I sum these three terms together, the receivables are 0. However, we have a receivable of 50 because we were due to use the Helen Lay room on a particular date, but we were asked not to attend because maintenance works were going. So that gives us 1 day in lieu, which is worth £50. And so we have a receivable of £50. So this receivable here just sums all these figures together, and the sum total is the total receivable, so our receivables are £50. Same principle for liabilities. So liabilities are money that we owe someone else, but we haven't yet paid them. And currently you can see there's no liabilities that are logged, but we have had liabilities in the past. So if I go down to the bottom here, we knew that we had a liability for rent to pay out, which was on the 1st of April, £300. We also had liability, so this is a little bit more complicated, but if we start here, a positive figure here means that there's a liability. And so Warwick Gates, we knew that there was a £45 liability. We owed Warwick Gates £45 because that was rent that we hadn't yet paid. Similarly, we had a belief workshop, which was £50. So that's something that we hadn't yet paid. We also had our April, May, June dues, which were £300. So those were all liabilities. So if we hadn't paid them, our total liabilities would have been the sum of all of this to here, right? Which was a total of £98 or whatever it happens to be. But as it turns out, we pay, so we match that back to this, that pays that off, this pays that off, that pays that off, and then we had another room rent, £45 and minus £45. So all of this sums to zero, which means that we've cleared our liabilities within that period. But this is also true for all of this as well. Talk to the previous treasurer just to give a sense of what that means. But really, it's just to say that at the moment, we don't owe anybody anything. But when we do, and we haven't paid it, it will appear as a liability here. And that needs to be entered into the report that's shared with the committee. And as you can see, our current petty cash, as described, we don't have it anymore, is zero. And then total mandatory spend for the year so far. So that's the sum total of all the TMI dues that we pay, the sum total of all the rent we pay, bank charges, all together. That's that figure here. So you've got this spy chart here. It will probably be gone by the time you do your because this is just here for me to just quickly do an error check. So just imagine that isn't there. Just messes things up. So that's it. That's how you do your month-end report. I know that was a lot to take in, and you may need to watch that video once or twice, but get in touch with the treasurer, and if you have any questions about the process, let them know. Okay, thank you for your patience. Apologies for if the explanation wasn't clear enough, and I'll see you later.